Hey everyone. So welcome to Good News in EA. I think this is a very fun topic to start our morning off with. So just a reminder, at the end of the session, we're going to be having a quick Q&A. So submit all your questions on Swapcard. It should be under the live discussion tab on the event, and then you submit your questions under questions. So welcome to Good News in EA with Shakeel Hashim. Shakeel is the head of communications at the Center for Effective Altruism, where he plays an instrumental role in supporting the effective altruism community to achieve its mission of creating a significantly better world. Before joining CEA, Shakeel was a news editor at The Economist. He also worked as a growth manager and newsletter writer at Protocol, where he was responsible for developing the digital products and expanding the audience. Additionally, Shakeel worked as a financial journalist at Finimize and a contributor to The Economist. So everyone give it up for Shakeel.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming, and I'm excited to be here. Yeah. So why am I doing this talk? As many of you know, it's been a kind of difficult few months in effective altruism. There's not been a lot of focus on good news. And I think amid all the negativity, it's quite easy to miss really good, impactful, exciting stuff that's happened. I think it's important because it reminds us that our work and our donations are having a huge positive impact. It reminds why any of us are here and what we're doing this for. I think that's important. And also we can learn from what's working, which I think is quite useful. A few caveats. So most importantly, I'm drawing the boundaries of this. It's impossible to cover everything that's happened in and around the EA ecosystem. There's too much. So if I've missed stuff you've worked on, sorry. And I'm defining it as things that have received significant support from or funding from the EA ecosystem. So in a lot of cases, that means funding from Open Philanthropy or other EA funding bodies. But it's important to remember that a lot of this work has happened as a result of lots of hard work from lots and lots of people, including lots of people that wouldn't identify themselves as part of the EA community. So we can take some credit, but we can't take all the credit. And I think that's quite important to remember. So that said, let's jump into it. So I'm going to start by talking about charity entrepreneurship. If you've not heard of them, they're a really, really cool organization based in London. Their plan and their mission is to research new charity ideas, and then they incubate charities based on what the most promising ideas are. Each year they incubate a bunch of charities. Last year they did 5. One that I'm really excited about is the Center for Effective Aid Policy, which is a lobbying organization that's trying to persuade governments to spend their foreign aid budgets more effectively and also to just spend more on foreign aid. And that's a potentially really high impact lever that we've got that hasn't been pulled yet. And so I'm quite optimistic about what could happen there. And then there's also this cool organization called Vida Plena. I'd say they're one of a batch of new organizations in EA that's very focused on mental health, which has been somewhat neglected to date, I'd say, by EA. This one in particular is based in and operating out of Latin America, which is really cool, just to see more EA work happening in different countries. Giving What We Can is one of the original EA organizations, and it is still growing. Over 1,400 new people signed the Giving Pledge last year, pledging to give away 10% or more of their income. Now, over 8,000 people are giving away 10% or more, which I think is just phenomenal. And in giving season, in December and January last year and this year, they raised almost $16 million, which is just an astonishingly large amount of money. Sticking with the giving thing, this is a really new thing. I think it launched this week. Zakat is a practice in Islam that encourages people to, or actually mandates people give away a portion of their wealth each year, normally during Ramadan, which starts next week. To my knowledge, this week, the first effective giving opportunity that's compliant with Zakat rules launched this week. It was Give Directly in partnership with Giving What We Can as well. They're doing a fundraiser for this, giving cash transfers to people in Yemen. Cash transfers are much more cost effective than most traditional charities. They're not quite as effective as some of the most promising EA supported organizations like Malaria Nets, but they are still incredibly impactful and a lot more impactful than where a lot of Zakat money is otherwise going. So this is really exciting because I think it has the potential to transform the Zakat industry, which is $600 billion a year. And I'm very excited about spreading effective giving ideas to more communities. Okay, animal welfare stuff. There's so much EA stuff happening in animal welfare that I think doesn't get that much attention. A thing I didn't realize until fairly recently is that effective altruism money is, I think, the largest influence in farm animal advocacy now, which is huge. So last year, 161 new organizations committed to using cage-free animal products. That was in large part because of campaigning from EA organizations like the Humane League and the Open Wing Alliance. In total, almost 1,000 companies have already fulfilled their commitment to stop buying caged eggs, and a bunch more have commitments that should come into force in the next year or two. And we think that over 100 million animals are out of cages as a result of this, which is just like an astonishingly large number. And hopefully in the coming years, it'll be hundreds of millions more. In the EU, there's all sorts of cool legislative stuff happening. So the EU Commission is going to be putting forward a proposal to end the practice of killing male chicks, which is just like barbarically cruel. And the EU Food Safety Authority is recommending alternatives to cages. There's new EU legislation planned for, I think, later this year, which again is being heavily influenced by EA organizations and could lead to huge animal welfare gains across Europe. In the UK, cool stuff's happening too. So there was a bill last year which recognized the welfare of crabs, lobsters, and prawns for the first time as creatures that matter and have welfare concerns. Again, that was lobbied for by EA organizations or EA-supported organizations. And fish welfare was discussed in the UK Parliament for the first time. That's become a big issue in EA in the last few years, I'd say, as we're becoming more conscious of the sentience of fish. And again, that bill was, and that discussion even, was supported by EA-supported organizations. Another really cool thing, this is a research project from Rethink Priorities, which is a really, really cool organization. This was an attempt to compare the moral weights of species. So a really difficult thing when deciding how to spend money is, okay, how much pain can, say, an insect feel compared to a fish, compared to a human? And so with this really interesting blend of philosophy and empirical evidence, Rethink tried to calculate this. They came up with some really counterintuitive results, like that a bee is potentially worth more than salmon, which is interesting because maybe it's wrong and like we can't be certain, but if it's right, then this could really change our decision making and lead to us making better decisions in future. I'm really glad this kind of research is happening. Going back to global health, so Open Philanthropy, which is the biggest funder in EA, launched a bunch of new focus areas and hired new program officers for them. Global aid policy, like I mentioned earlier, is becoming an increasingly big focus. There's another thing which actually I forgot to include in the slides, where the new head of the US International Aid Department is very EA influenced in his thinking, very focused on like randomized controlled trials and stuff, which is really exciting because it means that the huge US aid budget might now be spent more effectively. Open Phil are also doing work in South Asian air quality. They're already the biggest funder in this space, despite having only been doing it for a year, tackling air pollution, particularly in India, but then also Bangladesh and Pakistan. And they're getting much more involved in public health regulation too. So they're the largest funder in lead prevention, which I'll talk more about in a minute, alcohol regulation, and pesticide suicide prevention, which is a really underrated and concerning health outcome. They're thinking about starting a full-time program there later this year, I think, which is really exciting. GiveWell is probably an organization you've all heard of as a charity recommender. For years, they didn't fund water quality interventions. So this is like water chlorination to improve the safety of water, because the evidence just didn't support it being that cost effective. But then a new study came out, I think it was the beginning of last year, or maybe end of the year before, and that found that actually water chlorination was way more cost effective than anyone had realized. And GiveWell, to their immense credit, changed their minds as a result of this, and have now made a grant of up to 65 million for Evidence Action's water chlorination program. And it seems like there's huge potential for money to go into this and help improve the lives of millions of people across Africa. Lead elimination. So there's this amazing organization called the Lead Exposure Elimination Project, or LEAP. What they do is they go around various countries which have, in many cases, already banned lead paint, and they do testing on the paint in the market to see if the lead paint has actually gone. And in lots of cases, they found out that it hasn't. These laws aren't being enforced properly. And so they've done research in Zimbabwe, Sierra Leone, and Pakistan to find this, found really concerning results, and brought them to the governments of those countries. The governments were horrified, obviously, and the governments are now working with LEAP to try to tackle the problem and reduce lead exposure, which leads to a whole bunch of horrible health outcomes. It's a really neglected problem, and this really tiny team, I think there may be like 5 or 6 people, has had a huge impact in an incredibly short amount of time, which is just amazing to see. Other global health stuff. The Against Malaria Foundation, which is one of like the original EA-supported charities, announced this year that it raised $500 million in total with their trademark graphic design, which I love so much. They estimate they've saved 170,000 lives because of this, which is incredible. Fortify Health, which supplements flour in, I think, predominantly India, with vitamins and minerals that help tackle malnutrition. They've reached over 1 million beneficiaries. And New Incentives, which encourages new mothers to vaccinate their babies, enrolled its millionth baby. And these are just like wonderful milestones for charities that have been around for a while and have all received huge amounts of EA support. Moving towards existential risk stuff. So loads of cool work happening on fighting the next pandemic. Obviously, the world in general is a bit more aware of the risk of pandemics than they were a few years ago. And so EAs who have been talking about this for years and years and years are starting to be a bit more heard, which is cool. The Nucleic Acid Observatory in Boston, I think, launched early last year. They're researching how to build an early warning system for new biological threats, with the hope being that eventually, if things work out, you'll be able to detect a new virus as soon as it's spreading and then catch it before it spirals into a pandemic. And then this organization called Alvea, which is a biotech company trying to basically figure out a way to develop vaccines really, really quickly and cost effectively. They've been kind of putting that into practice. So they became, I think, the quickest company ever to start clinical trials for a COVID vaccine, or to start animal trials, which is astonishing and really cool. And it's really exciting to see these, again, really small companies just picking a really ambitious project and going for it. Climate change often isn't talked about that much in EA, which I think is a shame, because we've had huge successes there. So it was either last year or beginning of this year, the Inflation Reduction Act passed in America. It allocates almost $400 billion for energy and climate change spending. And if you read through it, you'll see that it includes provisions for a whole bunch of really cost-effective climate action, as opposed to other climate action which we know isn't that effective. That's like cutting methane pollution, advancing carbon capture, nuclear energy is a huge one. And that, as far as I can tell, is in large part because of the work of the Clean Air Task Force. They did a ton of lobbying, they're really, really good at it, and shaped this bill in a way that seems to have made it really, really useful. And the Clean Air Task Force is itself receiving significant funding from EA donors. I think especially Founders Pledge are a big supporter of Clean Air Task Force. AI is a weird one because things are kind of scary at the moment. As I'm sure you've all seen, things are moving very quickly. But I am actually feeling much more optimistic than I was 6 months ago, for instance. So Anthropic, which is a lab that is fairly EA aligned and has a lot of EAs working there, they developed this constitutional AI technique, which seems to be a new way of helping to train less harmful AI assistants. As John Wentworth put it, in general, there seems to be something of a convergence towards an alignment paradigm. So there's a better research agenda than there was. There's more of a community than there was. It seems like there's just a better sense of, okay, here's what we need to do, which is really important. And then even with all the product launches this week, there were some huge wins in that, namely that for both GPT-4 and Claude, which is Anthropic's model, those were both audited by EAGxEvals, which is a EA-supported organization based in the Bay, which is trying to develop ways to audit and decide whether models are safe to release or not. This is really exciting to me because it shows that these labs are cooperating on, and they really care about getting this right, or at least they seem to care. And I think that's a really good position to be in. It would be much scarier if we were in a world where no one wanted to listen to ARC and people were just deploying things without doing any auditing. So I think that's cool. Also, Sam Altman at OpenAI published a post a few weeks ago called Preparing for AGI and Beyond. And that post, again, hard to know how much to take him at his word, but it seems to say all the right things of talking about taking these things seriously, caring about existential risks. And if you look at the names of the reviewers of that post, it includes lots of names from the EA community, which I'm really glad that he's trying to listen to our voices. And in general, there's been a lot more recognition for future generations in existential risk than there was a year ago, I think. So the Elders, which is an organization that was founded by Nelson Mandela and currently includes people like Mary Robinson and Ban Ki-moon, who used to run the UN, they announced their new strategic focus a few weeks ago. And existential risk is their key strategic focus for the next 5 years. And it includes lots of the things that we're also worried about, most notably pandemics. What We Owe the Future came out in August and was a bestseller in the UK and the US, sparked a whole bunch of conversations about long-termism and got a lot of people interested. And this Wellbeing of Future Generations bill passed the House of Lords. That was supported by a huge EA lobbying campaign and was really cool because it encourages the government to actually think about the impacts that their policies might have on the future. And there's loads of cool stuff in the pipeline. So this is a very brief overview. There's a UN Summit of the Future next year, which I'm incredibly excited about, to see the UN spending significant amounts of time talking about risks to future generations. Like I mentioned with the EU, there's loads of animal welfare regulation coming up, and some of it looks really promising. There's other exciting activity happening in the AI governance space, a bunch of stuff that's not public yet, but I think will be in the next few months and seems quite promising. Charity entrepreneurship is keeping on launching cool new charities. They are currently taking applications, I think, for their next cohort. And tons more. There's just loads of really cool stuff happening in this community, and I think we should all take a moment to appreciate what's happened, what's happening, and I guess get excited about all the things we can do in future. Thank you.
All right, that was so great. And it's always nice to get some hard numbers on this kind of progress. So 170,000 lives by AMF, very exciting stuff. Please try and get your questions in on Swapcard. So far, we do not appear to have, okay, so we have a few. So somebody wants to know if there's any good work being done on effective and equitable taxation system in developing countries. And because this might be more replaceable and sustainable than an effective aid system.
Good question. I don't know the answer. Nothing is springing to mind, but also I'm not aware of everything that gets funding. Yeah, I don't know, unfortunately.
I'm curious to hear if you think that CEA is interested in, say, foregrounding any of these developments because they think they are more scalable, or if you think that there are some that you think are you're less optimistic about.
Yeah, I think so. In general, we're really keen to try to tell the world about all the cool work that's happening in EA. I think a thing that's somewhat of a shame is because so many EA organizations are incredibly lean and so focused on cost effectiveness, they don't spend a lot of time on comms. And so there isn't that much effort, I think, put into trying to tell the world when there are these kinds of wins. And so one thing we're trying to do at CEA is support those organizations in telling those stories and making sure that they get publicity and coverage for them. The global health stuff is probably the easiest to explain to the outside world. You don't have to tell someone why malaria is bad. They know malaria is bad. But I'm also quite excited about spreading awareness of AI stuff in particular, because I think that's a really interesting case where people don't know much about it, but when they're told about it, they seem to connect quite well. Like, there was some really cool coverage in the New York Times in the past week about AI safety, and people seem to like it. Yeah, and I think that's one where public support and awareness of these risks could potentially make quite a big difference to how they turn out.
How do you think the EA community would benefit from doing a better job communicating its successes?
I think more investment in comm stuff in general. Like, I think a lot of the time this comes down to just having people around to do the kind of boring grunt work of someone has to write a press release, and someone has to send it to journalists, and someone has to call up the journalists and talk to them. And it's all just quite time consuming, so more capacity is a big one. I also think we can do a bit more. A lot of EA comms is done in like the EA forum style of writing, of like kind of a bit bland, kind of a bit academic. And there are things you can do to make things more exciting and foreground the like big developments and the novel insights from the research or project without sacrificing like epistemic integrity or anything. You don't need to lie or mislead. You can just say the exciting thing first instead of burying it like 3/4 of the way into a 10,000 word blog post. Yeah. Social media is another one, actually. I think we don't spend enough time or resources on social media, and I think we can and should.
All right, that was super helpful. Thank you for answering everyone's questions, and thank you for giving such an optimistic talk. It was really lovely to hear. Everyone give it up for Shakeel.